If you're working frequently in assemblies, you'll be using what are known as top-down modeling practices, which generally entails that you're starting with a component or several components and then building your assembly in context to those parts. In this case, we'll be building a cover to the in context part. And right now I'm in the in context assembly in the in context folder. So underneath insert components, there's an option called new part. I'll go ahead and click on that. And you'll see next to my mouse there's a green check mark. I can either click into the workspace, and this will simply add the part into space, or I can click on a face and use it to draw up a sketch. You'll notice that this automatically brought me into the sketch interface and the editing component interface. From here, I'm going to use the convert entities to convert out that outside edge. And you'll notice now next to sketch 1 is an arrow. And what this indicates is that this is referring to another part for a reference. So I'll go ahead and exit the sketch, create an extrude from the sketch, and we'll leave this at 0.1 inches. And I'll go ahead and exit the edit component. Now if you right click into this new part, we have something called list external references. And this is going to show if we have any external references to another part. First, we can see from referenced entity, we are referring to that in context 1 part. And it'll also tell us in what feature and the component from which the feature comes from. I actually like to rename the part as soon as I create it. So I'll right click in, say rename, and we're going to call this cover in context. You'll also notice next to the cover in context, you have a reference to not the in context part, but the in context assembly. What that's saying is this part is currently stored within the assembly and not in an external file. So what we'll also do is save the part in an external file. It's already going to be the same path as the assembly. We could, however, specify a path or save it internal to the assembly, which will leave this in context reference. But once you save it, that'll remove out the reference to the assembly. Since we did use a convert entity, if I double click on this face to draw up the dimensions, and I change this to 7 and hit the rebuild button, you'll see that that cover plate automatically updates to that same length. And I'm going to go ahead and double click again, change another dimension, make this 1.5. And I could also change this radius if I want as well. And I'll go ahead and change this back to 6. And you'll notice I didn't hit the rebuild button. Once I do that, it'll update all of those dimensions. If you are going to change out multiple dimensions at once, you might as well wait to hit the rebuild button until you're done. So now that we see how this plate follows the in context part, we're going to make a few more changes to the plate. And I like to work with colored parts Makes the assembly more lively. Makes it easier to distinguish between components. So I'll go ahead and add in a color. Not entirely necessary, but it makes the editing process generally a little bit easier. So now what I want to do is create a cut for all of these widgets in the cover plate. So I'll create a sketch on this face, and we want a gap between the outside edges of these widgets. So we're going to use an offset entities. In this case, I had chosen the face, so I'll go ahead and delete that out, choose offset entities again, and I'm going to right click on this edge and say select tangency, and click on the outside to add that portion of the sketch. From here I'm going to go ahead and exit out of the sketch because I actually created this sketch outside of the part. And this is a mistake I make once in a while when working with assemblies. And so if you create a complex sketch this way, you may want to go back in and redo it in the part, or I can say edit part, create a sketch on this face, choose that sketch one and say convert entities. So once again, you can either recreate the sketch or you can use convert entities. My recommendation is that if you have a relatively simple assembly, let's say a few parts, maybe 10, 15, 20 parts, that's pretty easy to manage and keep track of. If you are working with hundreds of parts, you'll tend to want to go back into that part and recreate the sketch instead of using the convert entities. The reason for that is you'll have multiple assembly level features, most likely, and it's easy to confuse those items, accidentally delete out a sketch, or accidentally move something around that blows up that entire feature on your part. So just keep that in mind when working with in-context references. So now that we're editing the part, I'll go ahead and click on the face and choose a sketch. And I like generally working normal to the plane, so I hit spacebar and double click normal to. Now once again, I'm going to right click and say select tangency and offset the entities. And set that to 0.05. And you'll notice if I select out another edge, that preview disappears. And if I try to add this in, you'll get an error message saying that you can only use one connected edge. So we'll have to do each one of these widgets individually. And I'll just go through clicking in each one. And with this command, you'll also notice when I click, I have a right mouse button icon check mark floating next to my mouse. If I right click, it'll automatically add in that feature. But I tend to just click into the space that I want the offset to be added to. And we'll just do the last one. And one of the unfortunate things here is that I had to do each one of these separately, so they're not automatically linked. But generally, I'm going to want the gap on all of these to be the same throughout. So what I'm going to do is add a global variable. I'm going to do that by saying equals, and we'll call this spacing. and click OK. And now we see that global variable icon. And you can see that now there's an equation. So now I can go in and add that global variable to each one of these dimensions. And now the last one. And now if I update, all of these gaps will update. And in order for these ones to update, you have to hit the rebuild at the top. That'll take you out of the sketch. If you go back in, you'll notice that all of those dimensions have updated. So from here, I want to create an extruded cut. And we'll just choose that sketch. Use an up to next. And click OK. Now we have cutouts for each one of those widgets. Lastly, for this part, I want to create a lip that's going to fit from this cover into this part. And to make this a little bit easier to see, I'm going to come in and create an exploded view on this default configuration and just drag this face out. Click OK. And so I'll be creating a lip to fit within this gap. So once again, we'll edit the part and we'll create a sketch on that back face. To select that out, we'll have to deactivate that exploded view. And then go back in and edit. So I want to create a sketch on the inside face. So I'll go ahead and right click and choose this select other option, or simply just click and choose select other. And then I'll choose this inside face and create a sketch. If you are editing the part and the in context part is transparent, if you have difficulty working with that transparency, you may just want to come into the display and switch this from force assembly transparency to opaque assembly. I find it makes it easier to work with the assembly in this manner. So now that I have a sketch on that back face, I'm going to come in and click on the transparency area in the display pane for my Boss Extrude 1, and that'll allow me to see this inside edge. I'm going to go ahead and select the tangency, choose Convert Entities, and then create an extrusion. From here, we'll choose Thin Feature. And we want it to be on the inside. And I can give this a length of 1/8 of an inch. And I'll go ahead and turn off that transparency and come back into editing the assembly. So if we take a look at the exploded view now, we can see that lip looks about right. So the last thing we'll do is take a look again at the list external references. and we're going to choose lock all. And what that's going to do is lock this part in place and lock down all its dimensions. So if we once again change out a few of the dimensions on the in context part, you'll notice that that front plate no longer changes with the back part. And you'll see an asterisk next to the reference arrows indicating that these references are locked. I can go back in, choose unlock all, and you see that automatically updates. The last option is to break all of the references. And you'll want to keep in mind when you break the references that you won't be able to get them back. So you want to be absolutely sure that you want to break each of these references. But if you do want to break all the references, you can come in, choose that option. And now whenever you update this part, the plate isn't going to change. And if I open the part and take a look at the sketches that it's built off of, you can see they're still fully defined. SOLIDWORKS will remember where those edges were. It'll store that into this part and it'll refer to that instead of referring back to the part that it was in context to. But this should get you started with working with in-context references and with top-down assembly modeling practices.